Have you ever wished you could travel all over the world and meet masterful people in the field of education? People you may not have known and the stories you've never heard. Cup of Capacity is just that. I wanted to introduce you to masterful people in education. Some are people I have known, and some I have heard about. They were chosen for their unique impact on education and to share the insights they've learned along the way. In a digital setting, each monthly episode features an in-depth conversation with a masterful leader as they explore their journey and answer a series of questions. Grab a refreshment and let's enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome back to A Cup of Capacity. I'm here today with the legendary Bertie Simmons. It is my honor to introduce her, and then I'm going to turn time over to her so that she can tell us a little bit about her journey in education. Dr. Bertie Simmons is a mother, educator, advocate, and author. She served for over 50 years in a large urban school district. Her book, Whispers of Hope, is a must-read for educators and advocates. She has won HEB's Best High School Principal and KHOU's Spirit of Texas Award. In 2006, Fur High School, under her leadership, won the XQ $10 million grant, only one of three schools in order to rethink high schools. And I'm going to turn it over to Bertie so she can tell us about her incredible journey.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, that one was the Inspiration Award. One of three schools in the United States that got that. The XQ Award was one of 10 in the United States, and that was in 2016. Okay. So they were a little bit apart. But my journey started actually when I was 10 years old, and I had a friend named Dorothy McGuire. And Dorothy and I, at that time, were raising money to try to help the war effort. It was not the Civil War. It was World War II. And we were gathering scrap iron and metals, and we got some money. At that time, it was also during the Depression and right after the Great Depression. And so we each got 4 quarters apiece. And I distinctly remembering thinking I was rich at that time. And I licked my thumb and I shined all my 4 quarters, and because it would make them prettier. And so Dorothy and I decided we lived in a rural North Louisiana. This was during the Jim Crow era. And it was also called the Bible Belt, which is a little bit confusing. It was very confusing to me as a child. And how you could be Jim Crow and so religious. But we went to get ice cream. And so I was going in the front door to get my ice cream. And Dorothy said, I can't go in there. So I said, of course you can go in here. We each have 4 quarters. And ice cream at that time was only 5 cents a cone. So I pulled her, I grabbed her hand and tried to pull her. She said, no, I'll be arrested. And I said, you can't be arrested because we're just going to get ice cream. We're not going to rob the store. But anyway, she said, no, I have to go to the back. So I said, why do you have to go to the back? And she said, because I'm colored. And I thought, colored? So I said, well, I'm going to go with my little colored friend to the back with her. And so I went to the back with her. And Dorothy rapped on the door and nothing happened. And she rapped again and nothing happened. And she rapped again and nothing happened. I knew those suckers in there, heard what she was doing. So I got up there and I just started banging on that door as hard as I could. That door flew open and the owner of the store started yelling at Dorothy until he saw me. And then he attacked me like crazy. And he said, you get back up front where you belong. And I said, no, I belong back here because I have 4 quarters and I'm with my friend. And he said, your parents are going to hear about this and you're going to pay for this. And I thought, I already have the money to pay for it. I don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, it was really interesting that I learned so much from Dorothy that I didn't know. And we were walking back home and she started telling me about the signs over the drinking fountains that said colored. I was almost positive it had Kool-Aid in it if it were colored. And I loved red Kool-Aid. So I said, does it have red Kool-Aid in it? She said, no, it's water. I said, why does it have colored? And she said, because I'm colored. And she said, I have to go to colored restrooms. Well, all of that was brand new to me. I had no idea about that. Then she started talking to me about the white boys that went down in the quarters. That's what they were called, Negro quarters at that time. And they put 2x4s at the back of window of their cars. And they went down the street, just walking the black boys in the head and knocking them down as they drove down the street. So that made me as mad as hops. And I said, is this the truth? You better be telling me the truth. And so I really was distressed by all of that, because that was my introduction to discrimination. And so it was a short time after that Dorothy came running to my house and she said, we're moving. And I said, you can't move, we're friends. And we had promised to be friends forever. And she said, we're moving. And my mother said, we're already packed, we have to go. And so I looked over there and their pickup truck was full of all the belongings, and they left. And I was just destroyed. And we did a thing that was so silly, but we would lick our thumb, press it on my right thumb, press it in the middle of the left hand, make a fist, and put the fist in the left hand, and we'd say friends forever. And then we would just touch each other's hands. So we promised to be friends forever. Well, it was later that night that I had a flickering in my window, and I looked out the window, and the guys in white robes and white hats were burning Dorothy's house down. And one of the things that absolutely killed me was they were laughing about it. So I ran out onto my porch and I said, this is not funny. Stop laughing, stop laughing. And they sped away, and I watched their house burn down. So I made a decision that I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to make the world a better place for all people. And that's when I decided to go into education. So, excuse me. So anyway, we were so poor. About almost everybody was poor, but we were dirt poor. And so I found that in order to go to college, I had a father who was an alcoholic and very abusive, that I was going to have to run away from home. And in order to get out of this place where I was, I used to lie out in the yard in the evenings and look at the stars and think of the poem Renaissance, and wondering how I would ever climb more of those walls to get out of that place. So I ran away from home, and finally I did get to college, or work my way through college. I didn't have enough money for books, so I would borrow books at night and go down in the basement and study. And I graduated in 3 years with, except for one course that I had to take, correspondent, and became a teacher. And so since that time, I have worked really hard to make life better for all people. And I have 60 years of experience. I had 2 years in Louisiana. Then I came to Houston and I worked here 58 years. But I was a teacher. I was a principal, elementary and high school principal. I was an assistant superintendent and a district superintendent. And there was one time I was executive director over campus management, so I was over all the schools in HIC. And so that was my experience as an educator. All this time fighting for social justice. Much of the time when I had a chance, I chose to work with underserved kids because I wanted to do for them what one of my favorite teachers had been able to do for me. So that's how I got to where I am today. Not exactly, but that's how what I did in education.
So I have to ask, did you ever find Dorothy?
We promised we would meet again, and I never saw Dorothy again. I tried as hard as I could to find Dorothy. Even when I was in college, my mother went down to the quarters to see if she could find out where Dorothy was, and they had moved, and then later I heard that Dorothy had died. So I never saw Dorothy again. But she made such an impression on me that my whole life I've let it because of the experiences I had with Dorothy. And could I tell just one more little story? Well,
Please.
we had a place called the Vines where she and I would go all the time. We'd swing on those vines and we'd drop into the water occasionally. But we had a tree that had a limb on it that was shaped like a Y. And so Dorothy would get up on one side of the limb and I'd get on the other. And by kicking the ground, we could bounce up and down. That was our swing. So the day after Dorothy, our house burned down, I ran over to that place to sit on my side of the Y, and tied to the other side with twine was a note from Dorothy. And she told me in that note that I should stop getting angry about things that I could never change. And she meant, you're not going to make the world better. It's always going to be like this. Because I had always said, Dorothy, why don't you fight this? Why do you just take it? And she said, because this is just the way the world is. And I said, then the world is not a good place. And that has to be changed. But Dorothy made such an impression on me. She would have no idea at 10 years old, or even as she grew up, the impression that she had made on my life and made me become what I am today.
Yes, I really do wonder about her family, and there's got to be someone we can find.
I was in a restaurant about 3 years ago with my daughter one evening, and when I got up, they asked me to get up and speak for some reason. I think might be because I'm so sexy. But anyway, I know that's foolish, but anyway, I got up and I told a little bit about Dorothy. And a man came over to me and he said, so you knew the McGuires? And I said, yes. And this all happened in Chatham, Louisiana. And so he said, I knew the McGuires too. And he was one that said Dorothy had died. And so I couldn't learn any more about them. But he was the only one that I could ever find that knew the McGuires.
Yeah.
And so that's just my story as I lived it.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to a teacher that's just starting out? You've had a lot of varied life experiences, and what advice would you give to a new teacher?
Well, if I were to talk to a new teacher, I would say that you have the most important job that there is to be held in America. You're more, you teach the doctors, you teach the lawyers, you teach all the people, and there's no other job as important as teaching. The only problem I have with teaching is the lack of compensation because America seems to value doctors and lawyers and those kind of people more than they do educators. And they never stop to think that those people would not be in those positions without having had teachers that taught them what they needed to learn.
You're absolutely right. What about a new principal, somebody who's just stepping into that leadership role for the very first time? I know you've supported a lot of principals over the years. What's your advice to a new principal this year, or maybe an experienced principal taking on a new campus?
If you're going to a new campus, I think that it's extraordinarily important that you begin to build rapport with the teachers as much as possible. I had trouble with that because when I was introduced, I was coming out of retirement and I was booed by the teachers, and they said I was only being sent there to spy on them. So one of the things I found was that it was really difficult to build rapport with them because they had a preconceived idea about me. But I went there to stay 3 months and I stayed 17 years. I was 67 when they called me out of retirement. So I am an old woman right now. But I would say build rapport. And one of the things that's really important is to get to know the students and to get to know the parents. I spent a lot of time talking and listening to students and visiting in the homes. I would even go in and take food in and say, let's eat together so that I could get a feel for who they were and what their interests were. because I believe in personalization of education. I believe in preparing students for life rather than preparing them for a state test.
So
Now, I'm a little radical.
So when I knew you in the work, you were the principal of Fur High School, and Fur is not a small high school. It's a large urban high school. So I'm putting myself in the place of a principal who's thinking, okay, but how do I personalize for, X number of children? I have a huge school. There's just no way to do that. And I remember going into your office to meet with you for the first time, and you left your door open literally the entire time, and people flowed in and out, and you were somehow able to get business done and really be there with your children. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it uh, to me, education is for students. It's not for the adults in the building. And even though the adults are highly significant, we're there to educate kids. And I had an open door policy. And whatever was going on, I'm just going to tell one brief story. I also never suspended kids, and I only expelled them if the law required it. We had restorative discipline and had a thinkery where they would go and restore relationships. And so one day I had a kid coming in crying, and somebody else was sitting in my office. And when I saw that kid coming in crying, I knew that what I needed to do right then was just excuse myself from the conversation and talk to the kid. And what had happened to her was she said she had not been able to do her work because her uncle in Mexico had belonged to the drug cartel. And so he owed money. So they kidnapped her little cousin. I think the cousin was 12 years old. And they were going to hold that kid kidnapped until her uncle could repay the money. And he finally repaid half of it. And the next morning, when they went out onto the porch, one half of that kid's body was lying there because they had cut the kid in half. And she had seen that. And she said she couldn't get over that and she couldn't do her work. And when kids have those kinds of experiences and they're struggling with that, it appears to me that the principal should be one that is interested in trying to find out what is going on and what could I help you do. Because I can see why that kid had trouble concentrating in class. And sometimes we just dismiss all of that, but the social emotional is so important. It's not just teaching academics, but it's working with the whole child, with all the wraparound services and those kinds of things that, especially with large urban school districts. And the area of town that first was in was one of the is sixth from the bottom nationally in income, education, and health services. So and it was predominantly, actually it was a minority school. And here was this old white woman at 67. They called me 3 times to go out there. And the first time I said no, because Fur was in the paper all the time, but that it was known for violence and gang activity. I knew nothing about how to deal with gangs. I knew nothing about gangs. But anyway, the second time they called me, I said no. So the third time they called me, I had just lost my granddaughter. She was 16 years old and she died in a snow skiing accident. And she had always said to me, Nana, I'm going to grow up to make the world a better place for all people. And every time I was with Ashley, her name was Ashley Finley. She was in 10th grade at Bel Air High School. And she always said that same thing to me. So that morning that they called me, I thought, Ashley can't do this. So I'm going to go in her stead. And I was scared to death to go out there because I was old, I was white, and it was minority school. And I fell in love once I got there. And it stayed 17 years. So I don't know. It seems to me that should be we're about humanizing education as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I think. What do you feel like were some moves that you made initially you can't help the fact that they're going to see you as an older white woman. And so what moves did you make to feel that you did humanize yourself and to make the connection with the students and the families?
I started visiting classrooms, and the teachers at that time in that school were all white. And they told me that the kids were lazy, that the parents didn't care whether they learned or not, and they never came to school prepared. And so I started visiting the classrooms and getting to know uh, the kids. And then I found out, sometimes educators, education in general, they do such dumb things like make rules that hurt kids rather than help them. And at that time, they had a rule that they were suspended if they came to school out of dress code. And nobody gave them the dress code, and the poor people were poor. Many of them were unemployed. And so if they would come to, and sometimes they had to all of them had to tuck their shirts in. And I'll never forget this day that this kid, when I saw him and he said, "Miss, I want to graduate, but I don't think I will because I don't think they're going to let me stay in school long enough." So anyway, I told him to come see me in my office, and I didn't think he would come. And I was sitting in my office, and I heard this. Actually, he came in on cotton feet. It was so quiet, and I looked up, and there he sat. And so he said, "Did you really mean for me to come see you? Because I've never been to the principal before." And I said, "Well, you're coming in love. You're not coming because I'm going to punish you." So he sat down, and he was really chubby. And so he started crying, and he said, "Miss, one of the problems is that they make us tuck our shirts in." And all this big roll of fat was hanging in his lap because his shirt was tucked in. He said, "See, Miss, if we didn't have to tuck our shirts in, you wouldn't see all this fat. We could cover it up because it would be outside." So I went and met with the SDMC, and surely enough, they had a heart, and we did away with that policy. And how do you think the teachers felt? They wanted to throw me out
Right.
because they said I was a student advocate. I didn't realize that they were mutually exclusive roles. I thought you could be a student advocate and a teacher advocate. But that taught me so much with that one problem with the dress code, because we had such high dropout. It was called a dropout factory by the state, a direct pipeline from high school to prison by the state, and a throwaway school by the parents and kids. And part of it was that kind of thing. So,
Well, I know I was reviewing some of the social media that's out there about you, and I reread the article that was written by the Houston Press about you and your journey, and I was reminded of the work that you did with the gangs in that neighborhood. Do you want to share with everyone how you connected with the gangs in that community?
well, what happened was one day I came in from those really exciting principals meetings, and there was a riot on campus, and I was clueless. I didn't know what to do, and ambulances were hauling off police officers and students who had been injured. And so my assistant principal said to me, "We're going to send 32 gang members to an alternative school." And I said, "No, I will not do that." And they said, "What? You will be breaking the rules." So I said, "Well, if they're breaking the rules by calling an old 67-year-old woman out of retirement to come here." So I said, "I won't do that because we've done that over and over, and they come back worse than when we sent them." So I said no. And so what I did was call the 32 gangsters together. And that was another rule I broke because the district had said, "You never get warring gangs together." And I thought, how am I going to hear from all of them if I don't get them together? So I brought them together, and they were mean mugging me like you've never seen, mean mugging each other. And so I thought, what am I going to do with these gangsters? And I started trying to talk to them. And it was real interesting because at first they wouldn't talk. And then finally they began to talk to me. And I found out they didn't think 9/11 really happened. They said that was a movie, and that because they were a minority and people thought they were dumb, they could show them movies and they would really think 9/11 happened. So I said, I know it happened. I know because I've seen what happened. So I said, what if I took you to New York City to see Ground Zero? Would you have more confidence in our system if you saw that? And there was dead silence. And finally, one kid said, Miss, would you drive us? And I said, no, I can't drive you. I'm an old woman and you're a bunch of thugs. And they all started dying laughing. I don't know why. I would have been upset if somebody called me a thug, and they just died laughing about it. And so they also finally they signed a contract that there would be no more gang fights if I took, that was in August, and that if I was going to take them in June to New York, they wouldn't fight anymore. So you know what I did? I go down to HISD and the Office of Strategic Planning. So I said, I'm taking 32 gang members to New York. And I was wondering if you guys can help me get some sponsors from the business industry to help pay for this trip. And they said, what? I would keep that very quiet. People are going to think you're crazy. No, we can't give you money for that. So I left. I did something really dumb because then I went over to do a fundraiser. None of the parents had money. I don't understand how I thought I could do a fundraiser in an area that had no funds. And of course, I couldn't have a fundraiser. And so I got to thinking as the time is going on, it's getting into March. And I thought, oh my God, I don't have enough money to pay for all these gangsters to go. And besides that, teachers had said I was rewarding the wrong behavior, that I should be rewarding the smart kids. Well, they said, you should take the National Honor Society. I said, that's no problem. We only had 9 groups, 9 students in there. So I said, I'll take them with the gangsters. So anyway, that made it even worse than trying to get funds. So I was just about to decide to encourage them to have a baby fight so I could save face. And suddenly I had been working with Dr. Benekalik and Dr. Art Costa and Marion Libowitz as consultants. I had asked them to come in to help me from New Jersey and New York and wherever. And so they heard about what I was trying to do. And they said, that's not a bad idea. They never heard of anybody doing that, by the way.
Right.
But the next thing I know, I started getting money from everywhere. And I had enough money to take 32 gangsters and 9 members of the National Honor Society to New York City. And the interesting thing is, the teachers said, I said, I need chaperones. They said, good luck to you. We're not going. We'll watch you on Channel 13 when you're having gang fights in New York. And one teacher said he would go with us. So I got my daughter and my granddaughter and my friends that I knew. And we never had a gang fight after that. But I do want to tell you that I took them to a Broadway play. And when I started to take them, the Hispanic said, Miss, is this going to be mariachi? And I said, no, it's not going to be mariachi. And the black said, it's going to be hip hop. And I said, no, it's not going to be hip hop. So they said, well, we don't want to go. And the play I took them to was 42nd Street. And it was wonderful dancing. So before we left that night, the kid said, Miss, could we come back tomorrow night? I said, I don't have enough money to let you thugs go to the play again. But after that, they did away with the gang activity. And it was only because what I learned from that is if you show respect, you get respect. And one of the funny things that happened was they started walking to the meet. I got there at 6:30 in the morning. And I live in West U, so I had to drive 30 minutes to get there. And then I would leave at 6:30 at night, and many times it was dark. So the gangsters started walking me to my car. So one night they walked into my car and they said, Miss, the teachers are trying to get us to key your car. And I said, baby, don't even worry about that because I keep my keys in my purse. And they said, Miss, that's not what that means. They said, if you're going to be on this side of town, you better learn the lingo. Because they were going to get the Brian keys down in my car because I had a convertible then, a BMW. And they didn't like that, and they were just going to scrape the car. But I realized that I had more to be afraid of from the teachers than from the students until I finally began to interview a different kind of teacher. And I'm talking too much, so ask a question, stop me. But every day when I entered that campus, I thought of Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or sugar over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? And we had explosions all over that campus. And he also said, hold fast to your dreams, for when dreams die, life is like a broken winged bird that cannot fly. And we had broken winged birds just flopping around all over the campus. So when I started interviewing teachers, I asked if they could mend broken winged birds. And believe it or not, some of them knew what I was talking about.
Mhm.
And they said, yes, we can mend broken winged birds. So I began to hire that kind of teacher.
That's fantastic. So when you look back over your career, what are the things that you're most proud of?
The fact that I fell in love with a group of people and was able, and I know that only today I learned that I've made a contribution, because so many have been calling me and parents have been calling me. That day one, that students I had in 2002 called me and said I was the only person they could think of that could help them with this problem. But it was that I was still able at an old age like 67 to fall in love with a group of people and work with them to make the world a better place for all people.
So you fulfilled the dream of your granddaughter.
Yes, and that's why I went there to begin with. And I wanted to leave a legacy for her. And I felt in that community, as much as I even hear from my gangsters still, that I did leave a legacy for her.
I think you've left a legacy for so many people, anyone who's spent time with you or worked around you. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you a few questions to wrap up our time together. My first question is, what's your favorite word?
I have two, but I'll say that hope is my favorite. Hope and possibilities. Those are two tied, sort of, in my mind.
What's your least favorite word?
Um, Hopelessness.
Mm. What's your favorite book?
The favorite book was I Know How Cage Birds Sing,
Why was that your favorite book?
because I had been in a cage myself for several times, and it gave me hope that we could all spring out of a cage and make a difference.
Who's your favorite author?
Maya Angelou.
She's my favorite too.
Is she really? That's great.
Um, whose shoulders do you feel like you stand on, and what did they teach you?
Right now, I'm standing on personal friends who have been supportive of me over the years, and my family. Have a daughter and a granddaughter and a grandson and a great grandson whose name is Hank the Tank. And so I'm standing on all their shoulders, and I have for a considerable amount of time.
Okay. What challenges do you feel like are still out there to be unlocked? What are things that you still are trying to worry over or puzzle over?
I'm working with several different groups right now to try to bring equity to all people. And I've been really concerned about public education because I have learned with all the years that I've been in it that I've mostly seen people concerned about the adults in the programs rather than children. And so I'm working with several different groups to try to bring equity to all people, to work on this disease, the problems with disease, as you know, and an inordinate number of blacks and browns are dying from this disease. So I'm trying to work with some groups on that. And but one of my major things is like right now I'm concerned about going back to school in the fall. And I had a meeting last night about that and what the problems are and what we're going to try to do or we could do to make a difference, especially when I heard the president say he's going to withhold federal funds if districts don't often, and then they're tax exempt. He would cut that out. So I think that is all absurd, especially with what we have going on in Houston right now. They just open it up with students. We're just asking for people to get sick and die.
Yeah.
So that kills my working on that.
I can't wait to hear what you guys come up with.
It's going to be really interesting, I think, because as parents, it appears to me that the main thing right now is we have too many politics mixed up in what's going on with kids. And there are people more interested in the economy and getting the economy up. And I thought about, I have like even visualized this, we might have a good economy and look at the death we would have experienced as a result of it. Right. And so, and we had really good meeting last night where we're going to be offering suggestions. Even, are you still with HISD?
No, ma'am.
Okay, because we have somebody, and she's a Black lady, who's going to be writing to the superintendent about, because we need to start making better decisions.
Yeah. So what do you feel like is the best advice you were ever given?
The best advice that I was ever given was when I read Langston Hughes. He said, hold fast to your dreams. For when dreams die, life is like a broken winged bird that cannot fly. And I've always held fast to my dreams since 10 years old.
That's fantastic. Last question. What's a talent or a skill that you possess that very few people know about?
Now, this is absurd, but when I was in senior high school, I made All-State in basketball. And I'm almost a miscarriage. I mean, I'm only 5'2". But for some reason, I was determined, because I had a teacher that I loved so much, and she encouraged me, and she was the coach. And she knew about as much about coaching as I did about gangsters. And I wanted to make her happy, and I wanted to please her. And I worked so hard. And that the last game, I made 25 points, and I was 5'2", and I made All-State. But I know nobody in HISD knows that. And but I was an All-State basketball player.
You're secretly a whiz at basketball.
Yeah, not now, I would say, but I was at that time.
That's fantastic. Well, Bertie, I just have treasured every moment together on this recording, and I appreciate your time, and I thank you for every bit of impact that you've had on children and adults, whether they're family members or teachers, and school district systems, and the work that you continue to do. You have such a legacy and such an impact, and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me to be on your program, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
I hope you're highly successful, and I'm sure you will be.
Oh, thank you. Hey, thanks for listening to this interview. I hope you found value in the conversation, made a connection with your own life, and had an aha moment or two.